Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in Geography. Today, we're going to continue in our discussion about Western Europe, and in particular, we're going to focus on France and what are called the Benelux nations. So, what we're going to be able to do today, we're going to start by describing the cultural and physical traits of France and these Benelux nations. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means a little bit later. We're also going to be able to evaluate that relationship between the US and France. And those of you who are familiar with US history, you know that the French played a really important role in the US Revolution. We're also going to be able to list those Benelux nations today. And so let's go ahead and get started. So let's start with France. France is our largest nation in Western Europe. And I want to emphasize that it is the largest in Western Europe. The Seine and the Loire rivers are very navigable. They serve as an important shipping lanes in the French economy, as well as in the French nation. And the climate is very ideal for agriculture, which is part of the reason why the French are the fifth largest food producers in the world. If you're kind of looking at some of the other nations that are on that list, the US is at number one. Number two is Germany. Number three is the UK. And number four is China. And then, of course, just behind France is the Netherlands. So certainly France is very much up there as far as food production goes. And a lot of that is based on its rich soils, which it will find on the Northern European plain. Speaking of that economy, agriculture, like we mentioned, is very important, and you're not in the top five without agriculture being important, with maybe the exception of the UK. But manufacturing is also very important to the French economy. And so looking at agriculture, certainly not a complete list, but grapes are certainly important. Wine, you also see the production of things like champagne out of those grapes as well. Olives, certainly grains, fruits, and vegetables, and certainly things like dairy are also very important in French cuisine. As far as the mining side, bauxite, iron ore, coal, all very important. Remember, bauxite from earlier used in the formation of things like tinfoil. Most people, however, are employed in the service industries. And so this is another common thing between the French people and the people of the United States, is that most people are employed in those service industries. Tourism is also very important in the French economy. A lot of people come to France to see historical sites, museums, beaches, things such as the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame, the Louvre, which is a very famous museum which holds a variety of artifacts, including the Mona Lisa. When we look at power production, one of the ways that France is trying to address climate change is with the use of nuclear power as a form of electricity. And you can see in the image here on the right an example of a French power plant. Getting more into the French people, there's about 6 million French people, give or take, today, and about 3 out of every 4, 75%, live in urban areas. And that French mentality was largely built out of the French Revolution. And so that's where our national motto actually comes from, straight from the Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity. And in that tradition, you've seen a continuation of the majority of the population being Catholic, France being a Catholic nation, although you are starting to see more in Europe as a whole, less people identifying with religion, although France is still a very Catholic nation. French people can trace their ancestry back to the Celts, certainly back to the Romans and the Franks of early European history. And Paris continues to be a very important cultural center, not only for France, along with being its capital, but also of the world. And certainly a lot of cultural exchange makes its way in Paris and in France as a whole. Victor Hugo, as well as Claude Monet, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, these are all artists and authors who have given a lot of art to the world. Shift gears, talk a little bit about the government. The government right now is known as the Fifth Republic, and what that refers to is the changes that have existed in the French government since, and certainly French history, since the French Revolution. Both waves, certainly. And so this would be what is called the Fifth Republic. So that's referring to, again, a strong national government headed up by elected officials, and the executive side of this would be the president, who certainly manages foreign affairs and also is responsible for meeting with other nations. Emmanuel Macron, of course, you'll see meeting with leaders from around the world. And certainly another important part of that is appointing a prime minister whose role is to more head up the day-to-day affairs of the government of France. All right, let's shift gears. Let's get into these Benelux nations or Benelux nations. Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg. That's what we're referring to when we talk about these Benelux nations. And if we were going to describe them, we're going to use 3 words such as low in elevation, relatively flat as far as its physical geography goes, and as far as the cultural side, certainly very densely populated. Let's start with Belgium, and we'll talk a little bit about the Belgian economy. At the center of the economy is trade and manufacturing, which is, again, pretty common in Western Europe, especially. You're going to see lace, you're going to see chocolate, diamond cutting also in Belgium. These are all quite excellent things. As far as what they bring in metals, they bring in fuel, a lot of other natural resources due to its relatively limited size. Those are some things that have to be brought into the nation. As far as exports go, they're exporting vehicles, chemicals, and textiles. Certainly also keeping with the region, they're a very Roman Catholic nation. However, culturally, they have 2 very distinct groups. The Flemings speak Flemish, and they're typically found in the north. And the French-speaking Walloons are who you will find in the south. And occasionally there has been conflict that has arose between these 2 groups, although it has remained relatively peaceful. Brussels is its capital. This is an international trade center. There are several European Union buildings. In fact, some of the major headquarters are found in Brussels. Certainly, if we were to go in Belgium a little bit, you'll find a variety of important international buildings are found in Brussels and other places in Belgium. All right, let's talk about the Netherlands, or the lowlands. So one of the things to keep in mind is that the Netherlands are sometimes referred to as Holland, and the people are sometimes referred to as the Dutch. All mean the same thing. So when you're talking about the Netherlands, Holland, and the people of the Netherlands, or the Dutch, you're talking about the same thing. One thing that's interesting about the Netherlands is that most of it's actually below sea level, and they have brought in several tons of sand, rocks, and other materials in order to kind of help fortify and ensure the safety of cities like Amsterdam, for example. And so that has, of course, been done along with the introduction of dikes in order to help protect against rising tides, especially given that it's a very coastal nation. Certainly, polders have brought in a lot of rich soil, which helps to produce things like flowers. Holland is very well known for its tulip festival. And if you get the chance to go, you'll see several beautiful tulips found throughout Holland. They export cheese, certainly. And again, we mentioned vegetables being an important part. When it comes to agricultural exports, again, we mentioned earlier in our lecture here that they are number 6 on the list, right behind France. Amsterdam is also the capital of the Netherlands, and again, a very important cultural center. It's a home to artists like Rembrandt and Vincent van Gogh. I know that there's certainly some debate on how to pronounce his last name, but it's certainly a cultural center. Also, if you are a traveler in Europe, Amsterdam is a very busy airport and certainly plays a really important role in connecting visitors to the rest of Europe. All right, lastly, let's talk about Luxembourg, certainly last but not least. Luxembourg's quite a small nation. It's only about 55 miles long by about 35 miles wide. It's very prosperous. It has several multinational companies making their headquarters in Luxembourg. It's home to the second largest steel company in all of Europe. And check out, for my students, please check out the alternative video to kind of give you a sense of that. And certainly Luxembourg, there are many people who are quite multilingual. You'll hear French, you will hear German, you'll hear also Luxembourgian, which is kind of an interesting blend of an older German language and French. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to kind of wrap up our short lecture here on France as well as the Benelux nations. For my students, I highly recommend, and for all learners, I highly recommend you check out this check-in quiz just to kind of make sure that you're pulling out the important points. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to let me know. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for tuning in.